Now let's talk a little bit about multiplicity. So multiplicity is the number of times the root or the zero shows up. So when I factor or when I have the equation in factored form, if the root of 2 shows up 3 times, it has a multiplicity of 3, which would mean an odd multiplicity. If I factor and I find that I have a 0 of 0 that shows up twice, it has a multiplicity of 2, which means it is even. So what does even and odd multiplicity mean? Even multiplicity means, again, it shows up either 2 times, 4 times, 6 times, and the graph is just going to touch at that 0 and then bounce back, either back down or back up. So we could be having, if this is my 0 right here, we could be having a graph coming down, but instead of going through, it's going to come back down and bounce down. Notice it only touched, it didn't go through. Or vice versa, if here is my 0, it's coming down, but again, it's just going to touch and it bounces back up. Okay, so when it's our even multiplicity, we don't go through the axis, we just touch and come back down, or if we were starting here, we touch and come back up. Now, our odd multiplicity. Our odd multiplicity means that that root or 0 shows up 1 time, 3 times, 5 times, etc. So how does that look? What's going to happen is that we actually go through. So if I have a multiplicity of 1, let's say, okay? If that multiplicity is odd and 1, it's literally going to go right through. Or if it was coming down, again, it'll go right through. Now after that may curve and so forth, but when that multiplicity is 1, it's going to go right through the x-axis, pretty linearly. Now what about if I have a multiplicity of 3? The same deal is we're going to go right through that x-axis, but this time around it may start to curve a little bit. So you'll notice more of a sort of S-type curve. But again, we're going right through the x-axis. Or if it was coming from down, it would curve a little bit like this. Okay? So anytime it's an odd multiplicity, we're going to go right through the x-axis, but it could change a little bit in terms of whether I'm linear, like when the degree is 1, right? Or when it is cubic, it gives us more of an S-curve. So let's look at one little chart here that kind of sums that up. Again, if I have a single root or multiplicity is 1, we're going to go right through, kind of like a line. Still some curve to it, but way more linearly. Then if it's an even multiplicity, so for example, multiplicity of 2, I'm just touching. Okay, I'm going to come down and up, or like I had said before, we could just touch and come back down. And then a multiplicity of 3 is going to have that cubic-like look, okay, where we are going to curve up. Now, remember, end behavior comes along with this. So if I have a degree of 3, that 0 is showing 3 times, think about the end behavior. That's an odd degree, so we're going to have that opposite end behavior. Whereas if I have that multiplicity of 2 and it's an even, we can see the end behavior is the same there. Okay, so let's look at an example together. And if I gave you the example of f of x equals x plus 3 all squared times x to the third. So this is in factored form already. What this is telling us is that one of our roots is going to be -3. Now, what's the multiplicity? It's showing up twice. So our multiplicity is 2, which means that is even. So when I graph that, I know I'm just going to touch or bounce. So it'll look something like coming down and back up, or up and then back down. Okay? This is a root of 0. So our other will be x equals 0, and it has a multiplicity of 3. So that is odd. And remember, if it's odd, it's going to go right through. So it's either going to come down and through or come up and through. Now let's look at this all together. If I was to FOIL this all through, this would have a total degree of 5, because 2 plus 3 makes 5, and it's positive. So what that means is when it's odd and positive, I start down and I end up. So if I was to graph this, let's take a look. Okay, if I was to graph this, we said we will have a root at -3 and a root at 0. We said it will have to be down and end up because the total degree is 5. At -3, we're going to touch. So since I know my end behavior has to be down and end up, I know this graph is going to start here and not up here. So we start down, and as we approach that x equals -3, it's an even multiplicity, so I know I'm going to bounce and come back down. Now, I'm not just going to end down because I have to get back through this root, and I also know my end behavior is up. Well, when I go to x cubed, that's the root of 0. It's an odd multiplicity, so I'm going to come back up, but this one is going to curve like a cubic because it is to the third. So again, rough sketch, but our end behavior is down and up because the total degree is 5 and it's positive. I touch at the root of -3 because it has an even multiplicity of 2. And I go through the root of 0 because it has a multiplicity of 3, which is odd. And again, I go as an S curve through because of the multiplicity of 3.